As long as there's horror, there's going to be movies about serial killers. That's one subgenre that seems to never get old, as human monsters that could actually exist really do bring on the scares. This is M.L. Miller Frights, Best in Horror Countdown 2024 through 2025. At number 24 is Dangerous Animals. It was released on June 6th, 2025, and is streaming on Shudder from IFC Films. It's directed by Byrne and written by Nick Lepard. The free-spirited Zephyr, played by Hassie Harrison, doesn't want to be tied down with relationships and heads to Australia to live out of her van and surf. But as she preps for an early morning wave ride, Zephyr is abducted by Tucker, played by Jai Courtney, a brutal serial killer who runs a Swim with the Sharks boat tour and uses the abundance of sharks in the middle of the ocean off the coast to dispose of his victims. Bound with chains in the hull, Zephyr and another abductee, Heather, played by Ella Newton, are up next to fill Tucker's and the hungry shark's appetite for flesh. While there's a heavy dose of potent shark action in Dangerous Animals, it's not really a shark movie. Shark movies tend to be man versus nature films where nature's frustration is personified by a giant man-eating shark, or sharks, that relentlessly pursue the protagonist, acting as if it just cut them off in traffic, despite the fact that in nature, sharks really don't give a shit. They don't really get mad, they don't hold grudges, and they never fixate on one person or persons once that party starts to fight back. In Dangerous Animals, the sharks are a means to an end for our serial killer, Tucker. They represent the apex predator, and that's what Tucker believes he is. He's a giant, bulky, and savage man who takes what he wants with confidence and deadly force. Tucker goes out of his way to explain this to his victims, taking pleasure in inciting fear as much as he does watching them get devoured by the sharks. He also recognizes that Zephyr has the same qualities that he does. She's a loner.
You don't want to get mixed up with a guy like me. I'm a loner, Daddy. A rebel.
But with very few ties to others, yet will fight ruthlessly to survive. The film does a good job of likening Zephyr with the shark, down to a very intense scene where she stares one right in the eye, making a connection with the animal that few could do. I know about this a bit myself, as this photo proves, when I had quite an intense connection with a manatee last time I visited Florida. But how similar Zephyr is to a shark leads to a crucial flaw in the story that I'll get to a bit later. Dangerous Animals is a brutal movie. It doesn't shy away from the gore as it shows people being torn to shreds by the sharks. At the same time, Jai Courtney adds a vicious physicality to his performance as Tucker, basically tearing apart anything in his path as well. In many ways, this might be considered a slight version of torture porn, as it does feature a bound person being forced to watch physical devastation and enduring that devastation themselves. But the focus here is on the victim, the serial killer, and the sharks, and there's less of a spotlight on the torture. So those who are turned off by torture porn films have other things to pay attention to if you take a chance on this one. While he tried his hand with heroic leading men roles in Terminator Genisys, A Good Day to Die Hard, and Divergent, Jai Courtney seems to be much more convincing, confident, and have much more fun with villainous roles as seen in Suicide Squad and The Terminal List. He's absolutely horrifying in Dangerous Animals, and I hope this film gets him some more meaty villain roles to play. Whether he's taking on his rowdy prisoners, fascinated by watching the sharks eat people through his VHS video camera, or dancing like a roided-up Buffalo Bill and chugging liquor in his boat galley, Courtney is toxic masculinity at its absolute best. That's a compliment for those in the cheap seats. There is a sort of message here, as Tucker is very much an abusive male, looking to lord his power over bound and weaker women, and Zephyr herself represents the exact type of woman that thrills and terrifies him, herself digging her nails into his psyche, confronting him on his mother issues in one particular scene. But honestly, that type of divisive man versus woman talk bores me, and thankfully, the film doesn't lean into it too hard. Hasse Harrison is believable as Zephyr, who is in every way just as much of a shark as Tucker despite her small stature. The film is an ordeal for her, and nothing comes easy. The series of events that plays out is maddening as every attempt to escape is thwarted by Courtney. But the strength of her character is that she endures. Harrison's also quite beautiful, looking like someone took the prettier parts of both Jennifer Lawrence and Shailene Woodley and smooshed them together into a Kate Beckinsale mold, if you can imagine that. This was a physically demanding role, and Harrison did it seemingly with ease. This leads to the ending, which is the only thing I had issue with in Dangerous Animals. I'm not going to get into spoilerific specifics here, but all through the film, it really drives the point home that Zephyr is even more of a shark than Tucker, even so much that she is able to accomplish the aforementioned looking into the shark eyes scene. But later, the film goes for a more conventional Hollywood ending than committing to the bit that Zephyr is this cold-hearted loner. Sure, the happier ending might show a bit of growth in the character, but I feel that with the fact that this is such a brutal and vicious film, it should have had a more nihilistic sort of end. I feel that the ending that Dangerous Animals chose is going to be more of a crowd pleaser, but I feel a darker end would have kept closer to the main themes. That aside, Dangerous Animals is a brutal film. Courtney gives a truly iconic performance as a villain worthy of a sequel or maybe even a prequel. Harrison is a true up-and-comer, and the shark stuff made my toes curl so hard they almost broke. Not for the squeamish, Dangerous Animals may not be as intense as Sean Byrne's previous films, The Loved Ones and The Devil's Candy, but it is a devastating powerhouse of a horror film that bites hard. That's also meant as a compliment, by the way. Up next, and worth noting, is another story about a serial killer. This time around, it's based on real-life events. The Man in the White Van was released on December 13th, 2025, and available on demand on Amazon Prime from Relativity Media. It's directed by Warren Skeels and written by Warren Skeels and Sharon Y. Copy. In the early 70s, a serial killer makes his way across the Florida countryside, abducting and killing women. A young and rebellious girl named Annie, played by Madison Wolfe, finds herself targeted by the creepy man in the van, though her parents and siblings refuse to believe her. The Man in the White Van is perfectly good PG-13 horror. The rating indicates that you won't be getting any gratuitous nudity or gore, but the film does still have some teeth, which I found to be refreshing. Most of the time, when younger teens are the stars, a horror movie tends to be pretty bland, and there's no real sense of danger. But the danger is ever present in this one. First-time director Warren Skeels really gives this film an edge, suggesting a lot of violence without showing it and offering up some strong builds of tension and suspense. There's a grungy feel to this one. Dare I say it, The Man in the White Van has a Texas Chainsaw Massacre feel to it, with its 70s aesthetic, down-home country vibe, and the grisly, dusty landscape the action takes place in. The Man in the White Van also has the benefit of having a compelling protagonist in Madison Wolfe, who was the possessed little rascal Janet in The Conjuring 2. Wolfe is likable and relatable in her role as Annie, the outcast tomboy of the family. She hates to wear dresses, yet still dreams of kissing a boy by the time she was 16. Wolfe perfectly represents the dichotomy of hanging on to the innocence of youth while developing into a young woman with all of the dreams, confusion, and anxiety that goes with it. This movie makes Annie's story just as compelling as the danger looming in the background with the van, and I was surprised how invested I was in her story. Usually, in these cases, the day-to-day life of the protagonist is the least interesting, but because the conflict between Annie and her family is done in such an interesting way, that balance is achieved. It helps that the film has more experienced actors like Sean Astin and Ali Larter in it, who play Annie's oblivious parents. I think this is a testament to both Wolfe as an actress and Skeels as a director, in that both make this somewhat cliched story of a girl growing up so watchable. It helps that Skeels peppers in various abductions throughout the narrative as we get to know Annie's domestic plight. These scenes are bloodless, but brutal and scary nevertheless. The Man in the White Van is based on actual events, and I think my main criticism is that the film bounces around in time too often, making the throughway narrative a little muddy. I was able to follow that the other abductions were earlier in the timeline, while the main story is playing out linearly, but still I could see the way the story bops around in time, confusing some other viewers. The creepy man in the van, whose face is never revealed, keeps the necklaces of his victims hanging on his rearview mirror. I think the flashbacks would have been less jarring if the creeper touched each of these necklaces and then the flashback to the abduction and the murders occurs. I also think it isn't really made clear as to why Annie is the next target of the van creeper. The other abductions were made quickly and on the fly, most of them being grown women nabbed after their dates while leaving bars or other places where a woman would be walking alone at night. With Annie, the van creeper takes his time, watching Annie from the periphery and making multiple attempts before he leaps in for the kill. This really doesn't fit the creeper's MO according to the flashbacks, and there's no reason given other than some very convenient coincidences stopping him along the way, indicating why Annie is targeted and why he attempts to get her numerous times, even after failing to achieve his goal over and over. Still, I was surprised and entertained throughout Man in the White Van. Skeels makes the two developing stories interesting all the way through, and despite the plot holes, I never felt as if Annie was impervious to the direst of consequences. The danger felt real, and you don't often get that in PG-13 horror. In a genre where we get tepid and by-the-book PG-13 horror from Blumhouse numerous times a year, it's refreshing to see a film like The Man in the White Van deliver the story, the acting, the writing, and especially the scares at such a capable and fun level. The Man in the White Van is a pretty darn good horror film for those of all ages who love high suspense and true tension. As always, feel free to agree, disagree, or how about you play along at home and give me your own picks for your own favorite movies of the year. It's October, so let's talk horror. Come back tomorrow for the next level in the Best in Horror Countdown. Be sure to hit all of those pertinent bells and whistles down below, and you'll never miss a post. Happy Halloween, folks.